The dollar collapse, the secret system replacing the global order. The sanction hit at 9:14 a.m., and the money didn't move. A $1 billion transfer blinked out of SWIFT, then seconds later cleared on CIPS. In London, a vault door slid shut. Auditors were told to wait. In Shanghai, phones went dark, then lit with a single word, reroute. Tankers changed course mid-sea. An energy invoice flipped from dollars to a basket nobody here had priced yesterday. If you're thinking that can't touch your savings, pause, because the rules that anchor them just shifted. We're rewinding to see who laid the parallel rails, how they locked together, and why a quiet clock is already running. The three locks. To understand the break, start with the three locks that kept the dollar on the high ground, and the crew's already testing new keys. Lock 1, payment control. Not the app on your phone, the plumbing under it. For decades, Swift messaging, New York clearing, and correspondent chains formed a narrow canyon. Visibility gave leverage. OFAC lists traveled faster than ships. Banks from Lagos to Busan routed through a few windows, so one click could strand cash mid-ocean. That worked because routes were few and everyone feared the yellow light turning red. Lock 2, commodity pricing. Oil in dollars, freight financed in dollar credit, and insurance written by P&I clubs in places that listened when Washington or London called. Brent and WTI told you the price. Letters of credit told you the rules. Insurers told you whether a pilot would even board. Move crude, grain, metals. Move through dollar benchmarks and Western protection. Lock 3, reserves and custody. Surpluses parked in treasuries, Eurodollars fueled global credit, and safekeeping sat in Euroclear and Clearstream. You saved in dollars because depth lived there, market makers answered, and storms had a hotline. The Fed swapped lines. Safety felt like procedure, not belief. Then the hinges loosened. After Crimea in the 2010s, Russia built SPFS, a domestic messaging spine with foreign adapters. In the mid-2010, China launched CIPS for cross-border yuan. Between the late 2010s and early 2020s, local currency swap lines thickened. Oil for yuan pilots ran, and banks learned dual scripts. In parallel, Moscow and Beijing explicitly coordinated to stitch SPFS and CIPS together, so a payment could route across both without touching Western windows, exactly the kind of workaround their officials previewed after 2014. In 2022, a G20 central bank's reserves were immobilized. Custody turned into policy, and Treasury memos changed tone. If an asset can be frozen, it's not savings, it's leverage. Breakers went in by corridor. CIPS and SPFS gained translation layers. When one tunnel flagged enhanced due diligence, traffic repacked and moved. BRICS banks ceded trade credit without a dollar touch. Regional lenders offered local currency settlement. The BIS-led mBridge pilots, China, UAE, Thailand, HKMA, proved atomic settlement across CBDCs. 2 FX legs land at the same instant, final on arrival, no Western jurisdiction in the path. Software is one leg, hardware is the other. Power of Siberia turned strategy into steel, a 3,000-kilometer line moving Siberian gas directly into Chinese grids, a physical link the research called out as the backbone of the partnership. It made winter flow a fact and priced risk in uptime, not sea lanes. Shadow fleets, alt insurers, and discount math kept barrels moving despite price caps. Meanwhile, vault policies shifted. Central banks accumulated gold aggressively. Custody moved home. Bars migrated from London good delivery to kilo formats that travel Asia's arteries. Shanghai premiums told you when physical was tight. Open Loop, a gold-weighted settlement unit under quiet test, a basket that nets trade in national currencies and reconciles drift with metal on a schedule. Not a coin, a yardstick. Energy first, then bulk commodities. CRI&K corridors show the sanctions-proof edge. The wider BRICS web shows the mainstream. Inside those lanes, the no-limits language from February 2022 isn't just rhetoric. It's visible in exercise schedules, pipeline volumes, and payment routes that default to SPFS, CIPS when pressure rises. 3 locks, 3 sets of picks, payment rails with failovers, pricing that references new benches, reserves hedged with metal in domestic vaults. While New York perfected compliance dashboards, someone else wrote the fallback clause and taught treasurers which button to press when the light turns yellow. The dollar's high ground, how control worked. To see why the picks matter, we need to walk the hill the dollar built, plumbing, habits, and guardrails that felt like gravity. Start with oil. In the 1970s, producers agreed to price crude in dollars, and a loop snapped into place. Exporters took greenbacks, bought U.S. treasuries, and parked savings inside the deepest market on Earth. Those surpluses flowed back, keeping borrowing cheap and liquid. Offshore dollars, eurodollars, financed everything from Sao Paulo factories to Seoul shipyards. A Nigerian cargo, a Korean refinery, a Brazilian loan, all settled in dollars because the rails were smooth and the exit doors always open. Visibility gave those rails teeth. SWIFT didn't move money, it moved the messages that told banks what to do. If you saw the messages, you saw the routes. Pair that with New York clearing and long correspondent chains, and Washington could reach into an Indian Ocean charter or a Baltic shipyard without a U.S. entity on the invoice. OFAC didn't send troops, it sent lists. Compliance teams from Rotterdam to Riyadh read those lists and said no. Primary sanctions told U.S. persons what not to touch. Secondary sanctions told everyone else what might happen if they tried. The Eurodollar world magnified that reach. Dollars created outside the United States still settled through windows that answered to U.S. rules. A Singapore desk could write a dollar swap with a Turkish bank at 2 a.m., but when the waterfall hit New York, any flagged node stopped the flow. Meanwhile, custody kept sovereign savings tidy. Euroclear and Clearstream held the receipts. Tri-party repo desks turned treasuries into overnight cash. Central banks slept because collateral was pristine and markets were bottomless. If storms hit, the Federal Reserve opened swap lines to allies and the tide lifted boats. After 2008, emergency facilities made privilege feel like a hotline. Shipping turned policy into paperwork. Most blue water risk sat inside mutual clubs, the P&I insurers domiciled where calls from Washington or London mattered. If a cargo needed cover, the rules traveled with the policy. Maritime compliance became a gate at the harbor mouth. Oil benchmarks, Brent, WTI, set price. The financing behind those barrels drew on dollar credit. You didn't just buy oil, you bought the legal and financial scaffold around it. If that scaffold withdrew, ships stalled offshore, letters of credit died in inboxes, and pilots waited for instructions. The 2000s tightened the mesh. Patriot Act rules pulled KYC and AML into daily banking. Banks built towers of compliance, stacking watch lists into dashboards. Then the 2008 crisis rewired the emergency circuits. When funding froze, the Fed swap lines became global oxygen. Dollars rushed to Europe and Japan. Commercial paper unfroze. The world relearned that dollar liquidity was the fire hose you wanted when engines failed. Exorbitant privilege stopped being a slogan and became a workflow. But listen to the fine print. Every added lever, more designations, bigger fines, told boardrooms and ministries that the currency came with policy strings. That was tolerable when the rules felt predictable. Crimea added a warning. In 2022, immobilizing a G20 central bank's reserves crossed a line. That wasn't a normal sanction, that was custody becoming a lever. The old promise, that reserves were beyond the storm, looked conditional. Sovereigns asked their treasurers a hard question. What's safe if the safe can be switched off? There was another cost, quieter but relentless. Dollar dominance exported U.S. monetary choices. When the Fed hiked to tame inflation, screws tightened in Lagos, Lahore, and Lima. Debt priced in dollars grew heavier each tick. That dependency felt different when financial warfare moved from banks to central banks. If the toolset can scale from a lender to a sovereign, the calculus changes from efficiency to autonomy. Micro stakes made it human. A captain didn't need a U.S. stamp on his manifest to feel American power. He needed insurance. He needed a letter of credit from a bank that wanted New York access. He needed a port agent whose compliance team wouldn't risk a fine because one refiner on the itinerary touched a sanctioned counterparty last quarter. Control looked like paperwork, but it acted like a gate. Miss the gate, Miss Payroll. So the high ground was a stack, not a throne. Pricing in dollars set the stage. Messaging and clearing controlled movement. Insurance and custody kept risk manageable. Swap lines calmed panic. And sanctions, primary and secondary, turned tools into deterrence. For decades, it worked because the rails were faster, the markets deeper, and the storms survivable. The network effect fed itself. Use dollars because everyone else does. Park reserves where sellers always wait. Submit to the rules because the alternative is cost and delay. The trade-off at the core finally surfaced. Stability in exchange for discretion. Liquidity in exchange for compliance. When a major sovereign saw its savings turned inert, the balance shifted. The question stopped being, is there an alternative? It became, how much redundancy do we need before we can say no? That's when the first new pipes went in quietly under headlines that still assumed the hill couldn't be climbed. The break point, 2014 to 2022. 3 days after Crimea, a Moscow banker sat in a glass tower watching screens that no longer obeyed him. Payments that used to sing through New York slowed, then failed. Lines he never noticed, correspondence, clearers, compliance filters turned into walls. That week, the assumption that the hill couldn't be climbed died. The plan wasn't a speech, it was a wiring diagram. Sanctions in 2014 were more than fines, they were a systems test. Dollar funding tightened for Russian banks. Export letters of credit arrived with new caveats. A refinery in Omsk watched a parts shipment rerouted twice, then canceled because a supplier's parent didn't like the heat. SWIFT's visibility made every detour obvious. Touch a flagged node, the light went yellow. Persist, and it went red. So Russia built redundancy. The System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS, started as a domestic messenger, then grew adapters so foreign banks could reach ruble payments without US windows. At first, it looked provincial. Engineers kept writing, gateways multiplied. By the late 2010s, most internal traffic could keep moving even if the main road shut. Elegance didn't matter, uptime did. Across the border, China took careful notes. In 2015, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS, went live. If you want yuan to work for trade, you need rails under it. Banks across Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa attached. Corridors formed quietly. The first energy invoices in yuan were small, controlled, and settled fast. Traders saw the habit forming, a lane that didn't ask New York for permission. Between 2017 and 2019, soft infrastructure clicked into place. Local currency swap lines thickened. Trade desks wrote dual term sheets, one in dollars, one in yuan or rubles, with counterparty preference in the margin. A West Asian state oil firm tested partial yuan settlement on a spot cargo, then a term flow. The motive wasn't ideology, it was options that cleared. Interoperability arrived as a bag of adapters, not a single switch. Message translation mapped SPFS formats to ISO 20022 on CIPS and legacy MT fields. If one leg stalled, routers repacked the payload and tried another tunnel. Banks built routing trees, primary through SWIFT for low-risk flows, secondary through CIPS or SPFS for sensitive legs, human overrides for edge cases. Redundancy became muscle memory. Then 2022 tore the veil. A group of 20 central banks' foreign reserves were immobilized. Ministries around the world pulled up custody maps. A deputy governor in Southeast Asia put a finger on a box labeled Euroclear and asked, "What exactly do we own?" In Moscow and Beijing, the answer had already taken shape. Route sensitive flows over SPFS and CIPS, settle energy in national currencies, and keep building the joint playbook the research called a direct response to sanctions. Gold stopped being a romance. Jurisdiction started to matter more than yield. Checklists changed first. Reserve managers were weighted toward home-held assets. Bars moved from European chains into domestic vaults. Import licenses for kilo bars accelerated. Shanghai premiums ran hot on tight weeks, telling you where stress lived. Banks edited basis assumptions that treated dollar funding as frictionless. Risk models added corridors as variables. Non-aligned states hedged with intent. A finance minister in Africa demanded dual rail banking, one global bank for Western lanes, one regional bank tied to CIPS. A South Asian refinery split insurance between a traditional P&I club and a Gulf underwriter. Letters of credit added clauses naming alternative rails in case of disruption. That phrase crept into dozens of contracts and stayed. The hardware kept pace. Power of Siberia moved gas beneath mountains where destroyers can't patrol. Port concessions ringed the Indian Ocean with friendly docks for friendly ships. A shadow fleet of older tankers, muted transponders, and renamed cargoes delivered barrels insured by new clubs. Discounts bought independence from certain phone calls. The barrel burned the same. The money found other routes. Digital experiments matured. Central banks stepped into the BIS sandbox. Project mBridge proved atomic settlement, two legs of foreign exchange locking in the same ledger tick, with China's PBOC, the HKMA, the UAE, and Thailand in the core. Fees fell because hops vanished. Timelines shrank because correspondence disappeared. Daylight overdrafts turned into a design choice. For treasurers, certainty beat charm. Boardrooms absorbed the lesson in one sentence. We're not leaving the dollar, we're adding exits. Corporates kept dollar balance sheets for debt, but they rehearsed. A metals trader in Shanghai ran a small cargo through yuan settlement and wrote down which screens blinked. A Turkish importer paid a Russian supplier in rubles 1 month, yuan the next, and marked which forms changed. Drills became policy. Politics pushed, but math sealed habits. Freezes reframed risk. Buy treasuries for safety turned into assume the issuer won't object to your policy. Some could live with that, others needed insurance. Gold provided one kind, alternative rails provided another. Local currency swaps were a third. No single button could darken the room. By late 2022, the break wasn't a headline, it was a workflow. Routes had more lines, insurers had more names. Settlement screens offered choices. Nothing looked revolutionary on paper. Everything felt different at 3 a.m. when someone asked, "Can we move this without asking permission?" Increasingly, yes, if you take the other road. The parallel rails, CIPS, SPFS, and Interop. Unknown to them across town, a small branch banker was learning a new login screen. The banner didn't say SWIFT, it said CIPS. Same fields, counterparty, amount, purpose, code, but one quiet line at the bottom read, "Final under Chinese law." That line explained the second monitor on a lot of desks. CIPS wasn't a shiny consumer app. It was a backbone built to move cross-border yuan with its own messaging and settlement under the People's Bank of China's window. By the early 2020s, direct participants anchored in Shanghai, indirects linked through larger banks, correspondent routes reached into Southeast Asia, the Gulf, and parts of Africa. Interfaces mirrored global habits, ISO 20022 fields, MT lookalikes, so ops didn't need a new dictionary. Screening lists existed, just tuned to Chinese statutes, not OFAC's reach. Across the border, SPFS carried Russia's domestic traffic and built gateways for outsiders who needed ruble reach without New York's visibility. It started parochial, then grew pragmatic. Foreign banks parked adapters in ring-fenced subsidiaries so legal risk couldn't jump fences. It never pretended to be global. It promised uptime when other pipes flickered. Here, where engineering turned policy into practice. Interoperability wasn't one big switch. It was a bin full of adapters, exactly the SPFS, CIPS stitching the research described after 2014. Translation layers mapped SPFS formats to ISO 20022 on CIPS and to legacy MT fields where clients still lived. If a message tripped, enhanced due diligence on one rail, routers repackaged the payload and tried the other. Banks set routing trees, green lanes through SWIFT for vanilla trade, secondary lanes through CIPS or SPFS for sensitive corridors, human overrides for edge cases. Failovers moved from slide decks to muscle memory. Regional adoption made it normal. In Central Asia, mid-sized lenders added CIPS access for China-bound invoices while keeping SWIFT for Europe. Gulf banks connected to CIPS to settle yuan oil receipts with fewer questions and smaller fees. A handful experimented with SPFS for Black Sea cargoes, small sizes first, then term flows once the lawyers stopped sweating. Each new corridor lowered the social cost of hitting the non-dollar button. Speed mattered, but predictability mattered more. CIPS cut correspondent hops and shaved hours off settlement. It wasn't always faster on clean Western lanes, but it was consistently fast enough and less prone to policy ripples. Fee schedules rewarded repeat counterparties and steady corridors. Compliance ecosystems formed in parallel. KYC vendors under Chinese law, audit trails regulators accepted locally, screening libraries that didn't mirror Washington word for word. Not lax, aligned elsewhere. Legal scaffolding followed money. Contracts added annexes naming alternative rails, fallback currencies, and where disputes landed if settlement skipped SWIFT. Arbitration shifted. Singapore or Hong Kong appeared where London used to sit. Insurance mirrored the pivot. Regional underwriters wrote policies that looked like P&I wording, answered to regional courts, and recognized corridor benchmarks tied to delivery points east of Suez. Captains didn't learn doctrine. They learned which paper got a tugboat. Meanwhile, ops teams practiced like firefighters. Quarterly drills ran blackouts, flip descriptors to accurate but boring, switch rail priority, confirm receipt on the backup. Dashboards showed live corridor health, green for CIPS windows open, yellow for SWIFT delay notices, blue for SPFS retries. A treasurer learned to glance at those colors as often as Brent quotes. Micro Stakes told the story. A factory finance lead in Karachi had two identical invoices. One specified dollars via a European correspondent with a checklist longer than the packing list. The specified yuan via CIPS with a small discount and unchanged delivery. Payroll was Friday. The CIPS lane cleared Wednesday. That choice wasn't ideological, it was oxygen. Governance questions didn't vanish. Who sees the logs? How do you audit cross-border backups when two regulators disagree? Banks split flows and records so each jurisdiction saw what it needed, no more. It's more work, it's safer. Dispute templates evolved, dual journals, synchronized hashes, mirrored attestations, boring words that keep ships moving. Here where it nudged sanctions math. Jurisdiction lives where settlement lives. If a trade never touches New York or Brussels, the old levers don't disappear, but they reach differently. Screening can sit in corridor rules. Audit can be coded into gateways. The center of gravity shifts from a single referee to multiple courts with their own whistles. For ministries wary of secondary threats, that's breathing room. A desk-level scene locked the insight. A Southeast Asian importer's parts got stuck in a compliance loop. The supplier offered a CIPS corridor through a Hong Kong bank with pre-approved limits. The buyer's bank ran due diligence, posted caps, and pressed send. Confirmation returned before lunch. The shipment left the warehouse. Nobody wrote a speech. Someone updated a template. Then the last mile, SPFS, CIPS interop stabilized through bilateral agreements and testing clubs that met quietly. Performance targets were dull and ruthless. Latency thresholds, retry windows, error codes standardized across both sides. Fail rates fell. Ops escalations dropped. The fresher habit formed, don't argue with a yellow light. Change lanes. None of this replaced Swift. It replaced certainty with choice. Banks kept legacy rails for depth and history, but when screens flashed at 3 a.m., the other login worked. After a few quarters of drills and one rough week, treasurers stopped asking if the backup was real. They started asking which leg should move first. And that's how a backup becomes a rail. Not with a declaration, with a habit that pays the electric bill on time. Multi-CBDC Switchyard. While CIPS and SPFS built detours, engineers were laying a faster lane above them, Project mBridge. Run through the bank for international settlements. Sandbox with the People's Bank of China, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, and the Bank of Thailand at its core. It wasn't a press release. It was a switchyard. The idea was blunt. Settle cross-border in central bank money near instantly, 24/7, without touching dollar-centric pipes. Atomic settlement is the hinge. Two foreign exchange legs landing on the same ledger tick means nobody dangles in daylight, praying the other side clears. For treasurers, that cuts exposure from hours to seconds. For banks, it shrinks daylight overdrafts that used to eat capital. For regulators, it logs every step in a tamper-evident trail. Risk doesn't vanish. It's boxed and time-stamped. Pilots made it real. A Thai importer bought goods from a UAE supplier. Historically, you'd stack correspondent banks, wait across time zones, and budget for holds. On mBridge, the Thai bank locked digital bot at its node, the UAE bank locked digital dirham at its node, and a pay versus pay smart contract released both at the same instant. Fees fell because hops disappeared. Timelines collapsed because no intermediary needed to bless the leg. Final on arrival. No pending. No recall. APIs did quiet magic. mBridge sat like an express lane above bank cores. Gateways let legacy systems talk to the ledger without ripping out back offices. A regional lender could pilot a corridor without rewriting its life. Front ends looked like a wire form. The heavy lift hid in code, synchronized clocks, hashed instructions, and a rule set that refused to let one leg get ahead of the other. This is where sanctions math felt different. Jurisdiction lives where settlement lives. If a corridor clears entirely between participating central banks' nodes, compliance doesn't disappear, but it answers to corridor rules, not default Western screens. Screening lists can be embedded, audit can be mandatory, but the referee changes with the route. For ministries wary of secondary penalties, that's the oxygen they were missing. FX desks learn new habits. With atomic pay versus pay, settlement risk isn't hiding in the weeds, so market makers quoted tighter spreads. Tighter spreads pulled volume. Volume justified integration. Integration invited regulators to write the missing pages, limits, disclosures, dispute steps. A loop formed, speed lowered cost, cost attracted users, users forced policy to catch up. A micro story shows the stakes. A Vietnamese mid-cap had parts stuck in a compliance hold. Payroll was 3 days away. The supplier offered an mBridge lane via Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi. The buyer's bank checked corridor caps, hit send, and watched confirmation land in seconds. Trucks moved. Friday salaries posted. Nobody called a politician. Someone bookmarked a route. Governance didn't vanish into code. Who runs the software? Who sees the logs? When two regulators disagree, whose finger unfreezes a leg? In the sandbox, a steering group set corridor rules and caps. That kept pilots moving, but everyone understood the real version needs hard law. The compromise was modular sovereignty. Each central bank controls its node, the bridge connects nodes, and corridor-specific rules govern crossing. Shared rails, not shared balance sheets. The energy use case turned heads. A refinery in Asia bought a cargo from the Gulf with a clause pointing to a corridor benchmark and a reconciliation ban. The buyer posted local central bank money. The seller posted theirs. FX locked at a pre-agreed rate. Both sides released in one tick. The tanker still sailed. The paperwork shrank. The number of places where somebody could intervene dropped sharply. Banks loved the certainty more than the speed. Legacy cross-border fails are the gray hair nobody photographs. Holiday mismatches, flagged descriptors, a compliance question waking the wrong team at 2 a.m. with atomic settlement. There's no nowhere. It's done or it isn't, and the ledger tells you which second and why. That turns explain the delay calls into forward the log emails. Critics warned visibility could migrate too. True. Corridor owners can embed screening and demand auditability that satisfies their courts. Some corridors will look stricter than today's lanes, others won't. That's the point. Policy becomes competitive. If one route's rules waste your week, you test another that still meets your regulator's minimums. Here's the subtle shock. Once a treasurer sees a leg land with finality in seconds, the old cadence feels like dial up. You don't rip out Swift. You route the pain points to the bridge and leave the rest where depth still lives. Dual rails move from contingency to standard. Dashboards add a new color, green for mBridge corridor health. People glance at it like weather. Software needs an anchor. That's where the gold buffers and the unit prototypes matter. The bridge keeps digits honest in time. Metal keeps promises honest over quarters. Some pilots tied corridor FX to a basket with a gold band, reconciling drift on schedule, not a gold standard, a safety net. Energy first, then bulk commodities. You settle fast today and settle fairly at quarter end. Get this, the most persuasive marketing wasn't a presentation. It was a clean audit pack. Corridor logs matched invoices, caps stayed inside limits, and quarter-end reconciliations footed to the gram. After one stormy week, a bank's risk committee raised corridor limits quietly. A month later, a corporate treasury wrote a policy, mBridge for sensitive legs when available. No speeches, just a rule that keeps phones quiet at 3 a.m. Energy as currency, pipelining sanctions away. Software gave them speed, steel gave them certainty. Power of Siberia said the quiet part plainly. Lock gas in a pipe that ship blockades can't touch. From Yakutia fields into China's northeast, volumes ramped toward tens of billions of cubic meters a year under mountains and taiga, indifferent to patrols. The research underscored it as a strategic backbone, cementing Russia's role as supplier and China's role as industrial offtaker, where Russian resources meet Chinese manufacturing at scale. Once the trench is dug, price is a negotiation. Flow is a fact. 3 days earlier, a scheduling call sounded different. A Chinese utility didn't argue Brent spreads. It asked about winter pressure and uptime penalties. The finance line followed. Settlement in yuan through CIPS, discounts tied to delivery reliability, not a dollar index. That's energy as currency, molecules underwriting terms, kilowatt-hours shaping cash flow. The tariff sheet looked like a fuel gauge with a payment column. Oil learned new lanes. A gray fleet of older tankers changed hands, insurers, and names, then kept moving. Automatic identification system pings dimmed in familiar patches. Cargoes switched paperwork mid-sea, and discharge happened at ports where regional underwriters answered the phone. Discounts off headline benchmarks did the heavy lifting. Knock a few dollars per barrel and the queue shortens. Letters of credit once stapled to New York correspondents were rewritten to accept Gulf banks and CIPS rails. The barrel didn't change. The paperwork did. LNG added a cold chapter. Ice-class hulls traced Russia's Arctic coast, shaving weeks off Asia routes when the Northern Sea route opened. Insurance still needed bespoke riders and ice pilots, but the line was real enough for schedulers to bet on. Buyers paid for windows, not speeches. A slot that avoids choke points beats a debate about codes. Contracts got surgical. Long-term gas deals wrote currency choice into annexes. Yuan or rubles at buyer's option with FX smoothing against a published basket, reviewed on a calendar. Spot barrels from eastern ports carried dual tickets, western corridors with classic terms, or CIPS lanes with fewer questions and lighter fees. Treasurers matched routes to payroll dates and regulatory weather. Ideology never appeared in the sell formulas. India hedged by field. A state refiner tendered crude with bids accepted in rupees for port fees and yuan for cargo, then flipped back to dollars when equipment vendors demanded it. Benchmarks were probed. Some cargoes referenced Dubai quotes adjusted by onshore yuan rates, more trial than upheaval, but the trial repeated enough to matter. In the Gulf, exporters split by customer. USD for Europe, yuan for East Asia, mapping politics onto physics. Midstream companies became translators. Contracts layered sanctions disruption clauses with defined fallbacks. If a designated bank refuses on policy grounds, parties reroute settlement through named corridors within 3 business days. Arbitration seats shifted to Singapore or Abu Dhabi for non-dollar legs. Regional P&I lookalikes mirrored Western exclusions but answered to local courts. Captains cared about tugs and pilots. If the papers named the right courts, the tug showed. Here's the twist for old habits. Producers started pricing currency choice. Offer A, higher headline, dollar settlement, familiar insurance, easy hedges. Offer B, lower headline, yuan settlement, regional cover, schedules that dodge contested lanes. Buyers calculated total landed cost and reputational risk. In headline weeks, B often won. The surprise wasn't that alternatives existed. It was that they held under stress. Pipes deepened the shift. Dedicated flow gave planners something dollar liquidity used to grant: predictability. Swaps priced off physical delivery, not distant futures, and counterparties narrowed to firms with pipe access and corridor-compliant rails. Even maintenance became finance. Planned outages signaled settlement windows, and treasurers timed conversions to intake dips. Unknown to them, an auditor flagged a recurring spread. Shanghai kilobar premiums nudged higher each time a batch of pipeline invoices cleared in yuan. Correlation isn't causation, but traders started calling it the energy metal handshake. Energy paid the bills, gold smoothed the books. Invoices settled in local currency, then netted quarterly against a gold reference that damped FX noise. The math rewarded steady flow and punished delays. Critics noted the asymmetry. China pushed term discounts, Russia accepted to keep volumes locked and budgets funded. True, but pipelines swapped geopolitical vetoes for commercial pushes. Discounts can be argued each quarter, blacklists can't. For Moscow, guaranteed demand financed upstream when other doors closed. For Beijing, non-seaborne supply eased Malacca worries. Both price trade-offs they could live with. A micro-story keeps it human. A textile mill in Shandong faced rolling blackouts unless its gas distributor hit intake targets. The distributor's contract referenced pipeline volumes, pegging part of payment to yuan, part to a published basket. On a tight week, the treasurer chose the basket leg, netted a small gain against a stronger dollar, and kept looms running. No one gave a speech about de-dollarization. They made Friday payroll. The longer view is quieter. Each pipe, reroute, and dual-term sheet shifts a sliver of pricing power from one center to a network of corridors. Energy doesn't vote, but it allocates trust. When molecules ignore sanctions, money learns their path. And once flow is a fact, currency becomes a feature, one more lever in a deal that clears when headlines don't. The gold stacked silent repricing. To see why speed needed an anchor, follow the metal. Gold doesn't need trust. It needs a scale and a door that opens. After the 2022 reserve freeze, those doors started moving home. Custody memos changed verbs from held at to received by, not theater, jurisdiction. Central banks led, but the signals were in the plumbing. Russia had already built weight through the 2010s. After sanctions, it treated bars like a firewall, no counterparty, no promise, just serial numbers. China moved differently. Official purchases stepped steadily, but the louder tell was elsewhere. Import licenses widened, Shanghai premiums flashed hot on tight weeks, and refiners ramped kilo production. Kilos aren't poetry, they're pipes. London good delivery bars are fine for interbank. Kilos slide through Asia's retail, corporate, and regional bank arteries without calling London for permission. Custody maps were redrawn quietly. A Southeast Asian central bank repatriated a tranche that had lived in Europe since the 199s. The internal note read like a spreadsheet: diversify geographic risk, harmonize audits, contingency drill quarterly. A Gulf fund shifted from paper claims to numbered bars in a domestic facility, then hired a third auditor and installed cameras with randomized pulls. Paranoid until one headline makes it prudent. Price spoke in basis, not fireworks. On some Fridays, headline quotes matched, but Shanghai's physical premium nudged up and stayed. Arbitrage should have crushed it. It didn't because the bottleneck was paperwork, allocation, inspection windows, and which court your receipt would face if the elevator got stuck. Traders clipped spreads. Treasurers learned a new rule: if premiums stick, stress lives in custody, not charts. The Shanghai Gold Exchange turned into a pressure gauge. Volumes swelled around quarter ends when corporates settled. That wasn't fashion. It was accounting. Firms selling copper, buying crude, and billing in yuan marked quarters to a gold reference to smooth FX noise. Not barter, math. If your ledger rides a basket, a metal anchor keeps earnings from wobbling with every policy gust. CFOs sleep when auditors nod. Here's the pivot that stayed off TV. Bars moved from reserve to infrastructure. Gold for commodities, bridges, once exotic, became routine. A Shenzhen metals desk booked forward energy with a discount if settlement referenced a gold band. The clause was boring: collars, quarterly reconciliation, corridor law, but behavior changed. A BRICS bank backstopped spreads with a metal-linked line. If bands breached, margin funded in hours without a dollar scramble. Retail rules marked stress pulses. Import windows narrowed, premiums jumped, then eased when shipments cleared. In India, festival season always nudges demand, but in 2024 and 2025, policy tweaks layered in whispered guidance to smooth optics. The savers did what savers do. They waited a week, then bought the dip. Flows kept coming. Western desks called it a bull market. Eastern ministries called it insurance. The word matters. Trading invites bravado. Insurance invites redundancy. Custody dispersed, Shanghai, Moscow, Istanbul, Dubai, so one court couldn't freeze the whole. Audits diversified, state inspections, independent firms, even drone footage in one case to confirm warehouse intake. Belt and suspenders until they save a life. A mid-tier Asian bank wrote the transition into term sheets. Their cement importer kept getting nicked by compliance holds when dollar wires coughed. The bank offered yuan settlement preferred, collateralized by locally warehoused kilo bars audited monthly with defined haircuts. Fees higher than paper, lower than panic. The importer signed. A month later, a Western correspondent paused a batch. Payroll still cleared. The bars didn't move. That was the point. Refiners adjusted to a bifurcated map. Some Swiss plants remelted mixed origin. Asian refiners took doré, stamped kilobars, and shipped under Hallmark's regional hubs accepted. Compliance didn't vanish. It relocated. Provenance checks aligned with corridor law, disputes moved to different tribunals. Result: a wider network of acceptable stamps, fewer choke points that answered to one phone. So is this a gold standard in disguise? No, it's a balance beam. A prototype settlement unit, call it the unit, showed up in pilots as a yardstick, not cash. 2 parts national currencies, 1 part metal with a governance band around the gold weight. Invoices settled in local currency, quarter and nets reference the unit. If currency drift breached bands, a small, defined slice reconciled against gold through an audited pool. Energy first, then bulks, not romance. Predictable math with timestamps. Governance made it more boring and more durable. A committee published methodology and audit packs. Custody split across hubs with mirrored procedures. Disputes named arbitral forums everyone could live with: Singapore, Abu Dhabi. Liquidity backstops sat at the new development bank and regional partners, dispersing in member currencies against unit terms. You didn't flip units into cash at will. You settled within corridors and windows that kept games unprofitable. Microstakes showed why it stuck. A fertilizer importer hit a currency squall. The unit collar kept margin calls inside a band the backstop could cover. A mining firm smoothed earnings so covenants didn't trip on FX noise. A utility escaped a spike because the reconciliation line was written in metal terms, not the one currency that just ran. Silent repricing lives in these boring wins. Software compresses time. Metal absorbs shock. Together, they turn policy risk into operational routine. Each quarter that ends without a 3 a.m. apology call is another vote. Bars don't argue. Bars clear. And once treasurers trust the count, they stop asking for speeches and start asking for cereals. The unit, prototype settlement basket. While gold moved into vaults and mBridge learned to sprint, desks kept asking the same question. What yardstick do you use when nobody agrees on the referee? The answer under quiet test wasn't a new currency you despend. It was a unit of account, boring by design, built to net trade, smooth FX whiplash, and reconcile drift with metal on a schedule. People in back rooms started calling it the unit. Think spine, not skin. The unit's core was a basket. roughly 2 parts member currencies, 1 part gold with a governance band around the metal weight so trust didn't rest on speeches. Too little gold and belief evaporates under stress. Too much and liquidity freezes. The band made it operational. It told treasurers how much shock the system could eat before metal had to speak. Weights weren't guesswork. A rule set mapped contributions to trade shares, FX liquidity, and financial stability, reviewed on a calendar so nothing jolted mid-quarter. A small committee, statisticians, not politicians, published methodology and data sources. Another group handled verification, reference prices, vault statements, index math. Split the roles, split the temptations. The goal wasn't hype, it was a clean audit pack. Now the workflow that made it useful. Invoices could still settle in yuan, rupees, rials, or rubles, but counterparties tracked a running ledger in units. At quarter end, they looked at the net. If currency moves pushed it outside a defined band, a reconciliation clause triggered. A small slice settled against a gold reference, booked through a participating bank with access to an audited pool. No trucks, no forklifts, just claims shifting and logs updating. If the net stayed inside the band, nothing extra moved. Fewer wires, fewer fights. Backstops kept the engine quiet. The new development bank pre-committed short lines in unit terms, dispersed in member currencies inside corridor caps. The contingent reserve arrangement linked swap windows so surplus holders could place units and deficit holders could borrow them with haircut schedules tied to collateral quality. When volatility rose, windows widened. When it cooled, they narrowed. You don't want drama. You want rails that flex without headlines. Custody lived in multiple rooms. Gold tied to unit programs was allocated across Shanghai, Moscow, Dubai, and sometimes Johannesburg, each with mirrored audit procedures and cameras on schedules nobody could predict. Currency legs sat in onshore central bank accounts named in corridor rules. An index administrator posted daily references. The oversight team posted quarterly audit packs. 2 faces, 2 duties, 1 file structure. Governance needed a referee everyone could tolerate. Disputes named tribunals like Singapore or Abu Dhabi for corridor cases. Changing basket weights required supermajorities and cooling off periods. Observers, middle powers with skin in the trade lanes, got data access and comment windows. You can't buy legitimacy with adjectives. You rent it with process. Use cases rolled out by risk. Energy first, large, predictable flows where a small band saves big money. Bulk commodities next, metals and grains where seasonality and tonnage beg for smoothing. Manufactured goods later, if ever, too much invoicing churn. Financial contracts stayed downstream, trade finance, not savings accounts. You don't put retail on a prototype bridge. Here's how it felt on a desk. A Gulf exporter shipped crude east, invoiced in yuan, and added a line. Unit reference corridor index XYZ. The buyer paid through CIPS. At quarter end, the joint ledger showed a net outside the band because the yuan wobbled against other basket currencies. The reconciliation routine fired. A defined slice settled against gold through a BRICS bank with a metal-backed facility. Entries posted. The auditor nodded. Convertibility wasn't a promise, it was a band. You couldn't flip units into whatever you wanted on demand. You could settle obligations in named corridors with intolerances. Push outside, pay a fee, or wait the window. That killed the carry games before they started. Then an adoption moment that didn't trend. A middle power allowed corporates to hold unit balances for trade netting with clear tax treatment. Audit firms issued a practice note. A pilot LNG cargo priced with a unit collar landed clean. Traders shrugged and clicked copy template. Micro stakes made it sticky. A fertilizer importer avoided a margin spiral because the collar capped quarter-end drift. A mining firm smoothed earnings. Covenants stayed quiet. A utility escaped a squeeze when the backstop line, written in unit terms, dispersed fast while a headline rattled FX. CRINK sat at the sanctions-proof edge. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, using barter like math and gold references where banks wouldn't tread, while the broader BRICS web normalized the mainstream lanes. 2 rings, 1 toolkit. The outer ring proved resilience under pressure. The inner ring made it boring enough for auditors. This wasn't a gold standard sneaking back. It was a yardstick with a safety net. Software kept time honest. Metal kept value honest. The unit stitched the two so a bad Wednesday didn't blow up a good quarter. And once treasurers saw the band do its job, they wrote it into term sheets and stopped talking about ideology. They talked about bands, caps, and SCO, AIIB. While engineers wrote code and treasurers rewired invoices, institutions turned workarounds into habit. Not think tanks, Banks with capital, charters with teeth, forums with calendars. The web that quietly standardizes a parallel order. BRICS stopped being a talking club when money hit dirt. The new development bank financed power links, ports, and rail with timelines measured in cranes, not communiques. No governance sermons stapled to loans, procurement standards, environmental baselines, and dispute routes that fit corridor law. Project sheets read dull, voltage ratings, pile depths, arbitration seats. Dull is how ships leave on time. The contingent reserve arrangement sat behind it like a comfort line, $100 billion on paper, smaller in practice, but enough to calm a finance minister staring at a jumpy currency chart on a Wednesday. When prototype settlement baskets needed a custodian for backstops and audits, NDB looked built for it. Not perfection, presence. Shanghai Cooperation Organization work felt even more prosaic. It began as border paperwork and grew into a coordination habit. Security chiefs met, then transport ministers, then customs heads with clipboards and coffee. You can spot when a forum matures. The agenda adds logistics codes, data formats, digital ID standards. A customs official in Bishkek trusts a certificate from Kashgar because the serial format was hammered out in last quarter's subcommittee. Trucks move faster, rail slots conflict less. A banker in Almaty reduces buffer days on letters of credit by 2. That's policy, one spreadsheet at a time. AIIB sat in the middle with a different signal. It wasn't an echo of older banks. It onboarded traditional U.S. allies alongside regional players and insisted on modern project discipline. $100 billion authorized meant ports, grids, and tunnels designed to insurer specs. When an AIIB finance terminal switches on, underwriters see familiar risk registers and safety cases. That translates into coverage without lectures and rates that don't spike when headlines do. If your invoice is clear on CIPS, it helps when the cranes at Berth 9 were procured under a rubric global firms already respect. Local currency stacks brought the abstract home. BRICS and AIIB borrowers issued in yuan, rupees, rials, or rand, matching debt currency to revenue currency. Treasurers slept better because a Federal Reserve hike no longer detonated a city budget an ocean away. It also built curves. A domestic yield curve lets lenders price risk and allows funds to participate without side eye from compliance. You can't build liquidity without benchmarks. They wrote them into existence bond by bond. Interbank consortia filled gaps. Regional clearinghouses agreed on message fields, risk pools, and weekly netting for small banks straddling borders. Haircuts and caps prevented one failure from toppling cousins. In the Gulf, a network standardized documentation for yuan settlement tied to energy receipts. It felt like paperwork until a port agent cleared a ship on a Thursday instead of a Sunday. Standards bodies multiplied quietly. E-invoice formats aligned, customs codes harmonized, digital ID systems became bank accepted. A freight forwarder uploaded a single data packet instead of 5. A regulator saw the payload without asking for another photocopy. Every minute shaved at a checkpoint multiplied by 1,000 trucks is a shift in power. Membership gravity did the rest. Observers arrived, sat in back rows, then asked for working group slots. An African state joined an SCO transport subcommittee to protect its rail concession. A Southeast Asian economy took AIIB money for an interconnect and found itself aligning grid codes with neighbors. Once a corridor standard touches your border, your banks adopt the rails that clear there. Micro stakes show the change. A mid-sized Indian Ocean port faces a crane upgrade choice. One package arrives with a governance lecture and a long queue. The other lands with AIIB-style specs and faster disbursement. They sign speed. Within a year, carriers tied to CIPS add regular calls. The port's finance office opens accounts with a Gulf bank linked to the new rails. Dock workers get Friday pay without suspense. Critics warn about capture. Influence is real. Lockstep is. AIIB boards push back. SCO drills don't erase rivalries. NDB bond buyers demand spreads. The web is a toolkit more countries use each quarter because forms beat speeches. Unknown to them across town, a standards memo on digital bills of lading cut one border stop by 30 minutes. Multiply that by seasons, and you've explained how an institutional web becomes a lane people trust at 3 a.m. The middle power hedge, the patchwork world. While institutions stitched new lanes, the real test lived with countries that couldn't afford speeches. Middle powers stared at 2 doors and built a hallway between them, quiet, practical, and full of exit signs. Kazakhstan printed the playbook as policy. Geography punished mistakes. Legacy pipes ran north, new freight ran east. Oil still moved west on contracts priced in dollars because hedges worked and buyers were steady. But container trains rolled to China on schedules financed to AIIB specs, and a bank in Almaty kept two sets of lines: SWIFT into Europe for legacy clients, CIPS into China for manufacturers who couldn't risk another compliance hold. After 2022, invoices split by counterparty. Dollars to a Dutch refiner, yuan to a Chinese state buyer, and wages hedged with a local swap line so a Federal Reserve hike didn't blow up payroll. Customs posts that once stalled trucks for hours shaved minutes off crossings by adopting SCO forms and shared digital IDs. The policy wasn't poetry. It was Thursday departures that actually left. Vietnam rode its hedge on the water. Factories fed on Chinese components and shipped finished goods to U.S. buyers. The Navy drilled with America 1 week. A Shenzhen delegation sorted parts the next. A mid-tier electronics exporter kept dual contracts: dollars and Japanese letters of credit for shipments bound for Lowe's Angels, yuan and CIPS for assemblies headed to ASEAN. When a sanction rumor popped, the finance lead switched a secondary contract to faster settlement and prepaid key suppliers to lock labor. Insurance split along routes: classic P&I for contested lanes, regional cover for nearshore runs. The spreadsheet read like tide charts: settlement windows, port congestion, corridor health. No slogans, just uptime. Turkey turned straits into leverage. A Bursa textile firm billed Europe in euros with CE paperwork, while its construction arm bid Central Asian projects financed by BRICS banks in yuan. Banks in Istanbul kept SWIFT for tourist euros and attached to CIPS for energy receipts with fewer questions. Months before others, a mid-sized lender wrote sanctions disruption clauses that named alternative rails, arbitration in Singapore, and pre-approved corridors. Clients called them cautious, then one noisy week made them indispensable. India walked the tightrope and looked comfortable. Discounted Russian crude cleared in rupees or dirhams when convenient. Code and pharmaceuticals sold west in dollars. A seat in BRICS sat beside a seat in the Quad. A state refiner ran tenders accepting bids in dollars, yuan, and rupees with delivery fob and settlement on whichever lane cleared first. A Reserve Bank official announced a local currency settlement pilot with a Southeast Asian partner on Friday. A satellite launch paid in euros lifted on Monday. The contradiction wasn't a flaw, it was the hedge. Saudi Arabia read price more than posture. Security ties with Washington stayed. Select East Asia cargoes tested yuan settlement. The sovereign fund listed green bonds in London and Hong Kong. A shipping unit insured some voyages with a Gulf P&I upstart to diversify cover. The oil company's treasury tried a unit-referenced collar on a small LNG tranche, expanded it when quarter-end volatility shrank, and sent an internal note that said the quiet part: "We want flexibility, not flags." Here's a micro chain that lives under headlines. A Vietnamese shoemaker needs rubber from Malaysia, leather from India, machinery parts from Germany. 3 invoices, 3 rails. CNY via CIPS clears Wednesday, INR nets Friday through a local swap line, EUR through SWIFT gets pinged for enhanced due diligence. Payroll is Monday. The CFO taps a standby line from a regional bank tied into the new development bank, bridges cash for 48 hours, and ships on schedule. No ideology, just survival. Decision triggers repeated across capitals. Is insurance available without a lecture? Can we get paid when a headline lands? Which bank answers at 3 a.m.? The answers push them into patchwork. Dual rails by counterparty, baskets by product line, defense exercises with both blocks, debt drawn from AIIB and the World Bank in the same quarter. Limits showed fast. Hedge too loudly and someone leans. Hedge too little and you wake up frozen. The winning playbooks look dull. Diversify custody, keep some collateral in domestic vaults. Write clauses that travel, alternative rails, corridor benchmarks, arbitration seats everyone accepts. Rehearse failovers quarterly with stopwatches. Rotate exposures by season and supplier. Track corridor dashboards like weather. If a lane flashes yellow, don't argue, change lanes. Unknown to them, a standards tweak in an e-invoice platform trimmed one border stop by 12 minutes. Multiply that by 10,000 trucks and you've explained why middle powers keep knitting their own safety net. Not to choose sides, to keep choosing tomorrow. Friction lines, limits, and tensions. Scratch the surface and you'll see seams. The partnership that built pipes and code also carries competing maps, mismatched clocks, and old memories that don't sleep. Start with leverage. China's economy towers, Russia's budget leans on raw exports. That shows up every quarter. Beijing pushes term discounts. Moscow accepts to keep molecules flowing and payroll met. It isn't betrayal. It's math when steel is already in the ground. Power of Siberia locks direction. The buyer's bargaining power grows each winter. Commercial pressure replaces geopolitical vetoes, and the price conversation gets a little colder each year. Central Asia is the quiet tug-of-war. Kazakhstan signs on to Chinese-financed corridors, then phones Russian regulators for rail slots and security habits that never died. A customs chief in Almaty juggles SCO forms, AIIB specs, and a call from a Russian dispatcher asking for patience. One extra stamp whispers rivalry. A missing stamp becomes a 6-hour delay. Trucks don't care who wins the argument. They idle. Technology is a guarded exchange. Russia sells air defense and propulsion, then ships sealed subsystems and throttles schematics. The fear is practical. Sell one system today, face 5 copies tomorrow. Chinese planners mirror that caution, share enough to keep lines funded, stop short of handing a future competitor your crown jewels. Joint projects move on separate servers with code repositories that never quite merge. Cooperation, yes. Transparency, no. The Arctic draws different borders on the same map. Moscow calls the Northern Sea route a sovereign throat and security zone. Beijing brands itself a near-Arctic stakeholder and talks about global commons and polar Silk roads. Those phrases collide at ICE pilot licensing and satellite coverage. A tanker waits on a permit because 2 plans disagree on who tells it where to go. The ice melts slower than the inbox. Demography adds anxiety you can't memo away. Russia's Far East is vast and thinly populated. Across the river, Chinese provinces hold cities the size of countries. Governors welcome factories, then count passports carefully and ask Moscow for funds to keep locals from leaving. The fear isn't invasion. It's economic drift. History breathes under doors. The Sino-Soviet split of the 196s, firefights on rivers, denunciations, those files never left the cabinet. Chinese textbooks remember treaties that shifted borders in the 185s and 186s. Nobody raises this at ribbon cuttings. It shows up in tempo, slower responses after slights, contracts that name courts with surgical care, parades that pick anniversaries for a reason. Domestic politics complicate clean lines. In Moscow, elites debate becoming a resource appendage versus funding costly autonomy. In Beijing, local governments want openness to hit growth targets while national planners tight export controls to manage risk. Those crosscurrents land on trade desks when a shipment needs a license nobody wants to sign, or a bank hesitates because tomorrow's rule might retroactively apply to today. Security theaters test patience. Joint drills impress until procurement lists diverge. Russia needs cash and parts. China wants process and protection of IP. In Central Asia, a terror scare triggers Russian statements about rapid response while Chinese envoys sell investment as stability. Local presidents nod to both and ask a simpler question: who pays for border scanners this month? Sanctions edges cut in 2 directions. CRINK corridors, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, can move barter, munitions, and energy. But each extra tie raises Western scrutiny on firms that still want global markets. A Chinese manufacturer selling to Europe starts asking lawyers whether a shipment via Crink-linked port will spook a compliance team in Frankfurt. The workaround becomes ring fencing, subsidiaries, bankers, and books kept apart. Efficiency dies so optionality can live. Micro stakes reveal the cost. A Russian machine tool plant needs chips. Chinese suppliers have stock but want prepayment in yuan, bonded zone delivery, and a clause that lets them walk if a list updates. The plant pays more, waits longer, and misses a month's output. Later, a Chinese EV firm bids for nickel, pushes for deeper discounts and longer tenors, and gets them. The miner signs, trims exploration, and tomorrow's ore becomes a question mark. Energy discounts buy time but feed a loop. Lower upstream cash means deferred maintenance and fewer new wells. Beijing gets predictability. Moscow trades margin for certainty. Both accept the deal because the alternative is worse. Politics in every invoice and a phone call that cancels Tuesday. Governance friction persists at the code layer. SPFS, CIPS adapters pass traffic, but logs, data residency, and dispute flags become negotiation items. One regulator wants longer retention, the other wants narrower access. Banks split flows so each side sees enough and not too much. It works until a corridor alerter flashes at midnight and a human with 2 bosses has to decide which rule blinks. Media asymmetry doesn't help. China's Great Firewall limits Russian narratives. Russian platforms run Chinese stories freely. Mutual understanding flows one way faster than the other, and small cultural misses grow into procurement headaches and boardroom misreads. Yet the rails keep clearing. Contracts absorb distrust with buffers and bans. Arbitration seats get picked for neutrality, not romance. Personal relationships bridge what institutions can't. The partnership looks less like a marriage and more like neighbors with shared walls and separate safes. It holds under pressure, frays when headlines cool, renegotiates after each scare. And every time a ship docks on schedule and a payment lands without a call to New York, the habit strengthens. Friction is the fee for avoiding a single point of control. They're willing to pay it. The pipes don't sing, they hum. Price, policy, power, the new benchmark war. While the pipes and code matured, the scoreboard shifted somewhere quieter. The benchmarks that tell the world what things cost. Screens changed before speeches did. Clauses changed before communiques. Oil moved first. Brent and WTI still set headlines, but a second set of references ran in parallel. East Asia cargoes quoted Dubai blends with a yuan leg baked in, then settled through CIPS with discounts tied to corridor reliability, not just sulfur and distance. A refiner's treasurer stopped asking which index was famous and started asking which one cleared without drama. On days when calls from New York felt like weather, the answer pointed east. Metals followed, less noise, more consequence. Exchange fragmentation turned into a daily decision. A copper buyer referenced Asian delivery points and local warehouse brands because the trucks and inspectors lived closer to the plant. Aluminum contracts added a corridor premium that had nothing to do with purity and everything to do with whether a compliance screen would blink. Delivery points diversified. Qingdao and Jebel Ali joined Rotterdam. So merchandisers stopped laughing at the idea that a kilo bar standard could swim upstream into corporate hedges. Freight and insurance stitched price into practice. New P&I lookalikes and regional class societies wrote rules that mirrored the old but answered different phones. That changed day rates because a captain with cover sleeps, a captain without cover waits. If a voyage named a Gulf underwriter and a Hong Kong tribunal, the rate flexed. Multiply it by a gray fleet of repurposed tankers, and you get a freight curve drawn by lawyers and pilots as much as brokers. Compliance marketplaces, the quietest shift, gave risk teams new shelves. Screening libraries aligned to corridor rules, not just OFAC. KYC vendors licensed to regional regulators. Data trails customs accepted without calling London. Invoices gained QR-coded audit packs that shaved days off clearance and saved perishable margins. A tomato that doesn't rot on the dock is policy you can measure. FX liquidity adapted underfoot. Onshore and offshore yuan pools deepened. Local pairs thickened. Market makers quoted tighter spreads on lanes where settlement risk had fallen. If a Thai importer knew mBridge would force atomic pay versus pay on Monday, the desk shaved a basis point on Friday. Ruble, yuan stopped feeling like an alley and lit up like a street. Add swapped lines and a neighborhood appeared. Oil benchmarks faced a legitimacy fight disguised as convenience. Yuan-settled indices didn't need to dethrone Brent in London. They needed to be good enough for Asia delivery, with arbitration clauses everyone could live with and logistics everyone already used. Once national champions posted term sheets with dual references, Brent minus X or a CNH index minus Y, the choice migrated from geopolitics to workflow. Traders care about getting filled and getting home. If one index clears cleaner, that index grows. A micro scene shows why this sticks. A steel mill in South Asia buys coking coal on a furnace schedule, not a talk show schedule. Option A, a dollar index Western insurance, a bank that's twitchy this month. Option B, a corridor index yuan settlement, a compliance pact the local regulator already blessed. Payroll is Thursday. Option B wins by Tuesday afternoon. No one writes a memo. Ripples reach funds that never wanted to think about ships. If commodity baskets in their portfolios start to include contracts settled on different rails, model risk shifts. Custody might move from London to Singapore. A risk committee adds a line, non-dollar settlement exposure. Monitor. The vote still says approved, but more pins appear east of Suez. This is where the tone changed in subtle ways. Price isn't just a number. It's a stack of promises. If those promises sit under different laws, the number learns a new language. Benchmark wars aren't won by slogans. They're won by routines that never break when your back's to a deadline. The more often a corridor index saves a shipment, the more often a trader clicks it by default. Liquidity moats still matter, until policy turns deep pools shallow with a headline. Those are the days dual references earn their keep. Each time a price clears without a call to New York, the moat shrinks by a grain of sand. Unknown to them across town, a mid-tier bank updated onboarding for commodity clients. One extra page for corridor benchmarks, a new drop-down for CIPS settlement, an automatic risk weight for mBridge confirmed trades. The forms changed, so did leverage. Governance tugged at the edges. Western agencies questioned transparency in new indices. Corridor bodies answered with published methodologies, dispute forums in Singapore or Abu Dhabi, and mirrored audit trails. It wasn't perfect. It was enough. Good enough beats iconic when the ship must sail. A last desk-level moment, then we move. A cocoa importer in West Africa uses a corridor price with unit collars for quarter-end smoothing. The beans arrive, the bank smiles at the logs, and the hedge fund that used to squeeze basis watches spreads refuse to behave. The importer keeps the lights on. The benchmark earns a convert. When price, policy, and power align on a screen, the world changes without a parade. The parade comes later, when someone writes a textbook chapter about it. False ending I, the calm before a price gap. For a quarter, it felt almost normal. Dual rails hummed. CIPS settled clean. Swift lanes stayed open. mBridge pilots pulled weight quietly. Spreads narrowed. The risk officer took a Friday off. The patchwork looked like a quilt that might hold. Then an auditor's badge flashed at a major vault and the door didn't open. Not refused, rescheduled, then rescheduled again. Phones lit up. It was probably nothing the way these things are nothing until a small delivery delay kinked a basis at one hub. Brokers shrugged at lunch, then stared by dinner. Delivery date slid. A refinery's hedges no longer matched intake. Traders who'd promised metal at week's end found the week drifting. The screen still printed a single gold price, but a local premium jumped, then jumped again. Arbitrage should have crushed it. It didn't because paperwork tripped on words nobody cared about yesterday. Allocation, jurisdiction, inspection window. Oil hiccuped in parallel. A cluster of gray-hulled tankers hit weather and inspections at once. Discharge windows compressed. The corridor index held steady, but the old benchmark twitched. Differentials widened just enough to drag in-house counsel into email chains. Letters of credit that usually read like lifelines developed a cough. The calm thinned into a price gap. A small one, then not so small. Screens that were supposed to converge at close didn't. Compliance teams asked if fallback clauses applied. A treasurer reread the annex that named alternative rails and blessed the boring lawyer who insisted on it. A mid-sized Asian bank's dashboard flipped colors, green to yellow on Swift, yellow to green on CIPS. Meters don't lie, they don't soothe either. Here's the truth about price gaps. They don't care about narratives, they care about who can deliver Tuesday. A middle power flipped invoices to a unit collar it had only tested. The reconciliation math held. The quarter-end metal band absorbed drift. Payroll cleared. The CFO exhaled on a stairwell. Across town, a hedge fund called 3 brokers for the same metal and got 3 prices that should have been 1. Someone muttered about games. Someone else checked shipping logs and saw weather, inspections, and a door that wouldn't open. The reality was dull and dangerous. The parallel system had worked so well that people forgot old plumbing still held a few valves. Spreads widened, then steadied on the new rails. The lesson etched itself into term sheets and dashboards. When one door jams, stop knocking, take the stairs. The real crisis hadn't arrived yet, but the reflex had been trained. Collateral, custody, and control. The first call came from a metals desk that never calls first. Their serial list didn't match the vault's morning file. Sequencing, the liaison said, that's finance for we're not sure. 10 minutes later, a refinery pinged. The assay lot was fine, the release was, not headlines, just knobs turning one click tighter. Stakes were immediate. Synthetic claims, ETFs, unallocated pools, forward receipts behaved like metal until metal mattered. Now delivery windows slipped, basis blew out in one hub, and spreadsheets stopped balancing. A procurement lead with a furnace to feed couldn't spend a ticker. He needed a forklift and a bay door that opened. Triage began with a quiet reprioritization. Banks pulled physical priority lists. Producers and utilities jumped the queue. Financial hedgers waited. Warehouse receipts were cross-checked against camera logs and motion sensors. Allocated bars were counted by serial number, not trust. One mid-tier bank found a gap between promised and present. Small enough to deny, big enough to move a market. They didn't deny. They escrowed a replacement claim and called lawyers. Rehypothecation chains, invisible in calm, lit under stress. One dealer's unallocated pool traced 3 steps to a room with rescheduled inspections. A fund that thought it held a lien had a lien on someone else's lien. Collateral waterfalls designed in neat charts behaved like a broom closet. Each handle knocked another. Clearing members posted more cash and demanded steeper haircuts. The chain shortened the hard way. Custody moved from footnotes to survival. Clients with kilo bars in domestic vaults slept. Those with distant claims refreshed inboxes. A Southeast Asian reserve manager authorized a swap. Lend bars locally to keep industry running, borrow offshore claims to calm optics, then unwind when doors reopened. Markets saw comfort. Factories saw metal. Payments friction spread across pipes. Legacy corridors flipped to enhanced due diligence. That phrase eats hours. mBridge pilots, still fenced, suddenly looked like fire exits. A Thai bank and a Gulf bank ran a corridor for an energy-linked payment that kept a smelter alive. Pay versus pay landed in seconds. The CFO sent one line, use this lane for critical legs. Messaging rerouted by drill. Swift queues flashed amber. CIPS stayed green. SPFS adapters blinked, retried, and cleared. Ops flipped playbooks, rewrite descriptors to accurate but boring, switch priority, confirm receipts on the backup. Dashboards showed corridor health like weather. Yellow meant stop arguing, change lanes. A middle power moved first on policy. Treasury guidance hit inboxes. Critical imports may price with a unit collar. Quarter-end netting allowed within public bands. Gold reconciliations capped and pre-approved. Traders didn't clap. They recalculated. A fertilizer shipment that would have triggered a margin spiral slipped neatly inside the band. The reconciliation pointed to an audited pool with serials and cameras. Phones stopped ringing after midnight. Swap lines were tested like fire hoses. Some answered instantly, local currency windows built after 2014 and quietly maintained. Others consulted, which is velvet for no. Memory wrote itself. The lines that paid made friends. The lines that paused made plans for users to look elsewhere. Insurance flexed. Western P&I honored contracts and asked more questions. Regional underwriters issued addenda naming corridors, tribunals, and inspection windows. A fleet manager nudged routes by a day, shaved a week at Anchorage, and kept schedules that kept payrolls. Arbitration clauses drafted in calm finally earned their ink. Risk models updated on the fly. Regional rating shops ticked operational resilience up for firms with dual rails, hard custody, and corridor benchmarks. Global agencies added a footnote. A steel mill using atomic settlement and diversified collateral paid a touch less for working capital. Not politics, actuarial math. A desk-level scene locked the lesson. A cocoa importer in West Africa had beans nearing port and a wire flagged for review. The bank flipped settlement to a corridor with mBridge confirmation and a unit collar on quarter end. The ship docked, the hedge matched, and the buyer didn't blow a covenant. The treasurer sent a 2-word memo, template updated. Then the quiet reveal. Control isn't a speech. It's collateral that delivers, custody that answers, and rails that clear. In the drill, synthetic claims paid penalties, counted bars settled arguments. Banks that answered became hubs, corridors that worked became habit. And habits decide who writes the next set of forms. Adoption flywheel, from pilot to practice. The drill hardened instinct. The week after, energy exporters stopped debating and started dictating. A Gulf producer issued new master terms, local currency or basket settlement on long contracts, corridor benchmarks embedded, unit collars per written. Buyers balked for an hour, then signed. The carrot was priority loading. If your treasury could clear on the new rails, your cargo made the window. Bankers turned improvisation into checklists. Dual-term sheets became templates, one page for dollar routes, one for corridor rails, a clause that named mBridge pay versus pay when available, and a reconciliation band at quarter end. Compliance pre-approved lanes by risk tier. If a corridor stayed green for 60 days, limits rose. Clients that used it paid less for working capital because failure odds fell. Ratings edged where spreadsheets pointed. The agencies everyone knows kept scales, but regional shops added operational resilience for firms with dual rails, hard custody, and corridor benchmarks. A steel mill that shipped on atomic settlement and held audited bars shaved basis points off financing. Not politics, actuarial math after a noisy week. Corporate treasury policies went from memos to binders. Gold buffer moved from suggestion to line item. Multi-rail playbook became a cutover plan with names and minutes. A multinational wrote a 48-hour failover. If a designated lane flashes amber 3 times in a day, invoices flip to a pre-cleared CIPS route. FX rolls on mBridge if live. Legal notifies counterparties with a standard letter. They ran it on a holiday. It worked. The drill became rule. Procurement rewired onboarding. A new checkbox asked which corridors a supplier could clear. Another marked custody for collateral, kilobars in domestic vaults or paper claims abroad. Vendors that ticked the right boxes moved to the front of the line. Late adopters didn't get a lecture. They got fewer purchase orders. Retail spillover made it visible. Wallets added a corridor preference toggle. A traveler in Dubai paid a hotel bill from a Chinese app over a bridge lane that used to be a pilot. Fees were lower. Confirmation was instant. Nobody behind the counter knew why the terminal felt snappier. Habits form fast when they save $5 in 5 minutes. CBDC cross payments crept from white papers into workflows. Central banks kept retail fences, but wholesale corridors opened just enough for businesses to feel it. An SME in Bangkok paid a supplier in Abu Dhabi on Monday and saw finality before lunch. The owner called the bank because the speed looked like a mistake. It was. That phone call became an ad. Exporters pulled the curve. A West Asia LNG seller offered 2 schedules, classic terms with dollar settlement and broader windows, or corridor terms with tighter windows, lower fees, and unit collars at quarter end. Refiners stared at payroll dates and congestion maps, then picked the lane that didn't wake legal. The second schedule grew. Universities updated syllabi. Finance courses added a week on corridor benchmarks and atomic settlement risk. Audit firms issued a practice note for verifying unit reconciliations, serial sampling, camera logs, timestamp checks. Accounting software added fields for dual rails and custody status. When the back office speaks a language, the front office stops translating. Micro stories kept it human. A grain trader in Egypt once missed a ship and paid for it all season. After the drill, they negotiated a dual rail clause with a Black Sea seller. If legacy lanes flag, settlement flips to a corridor with a unit collar. Weather jammed a port. The clause saved 3 days and a sliver of margin that kept the business open through harvest. The CFO didn't present a theory. He pointed at cash in the account. The flywheel fed itself. Each adoption cut cost, shaved time, or prevented a bruise. That produced testimonials, which produced templates, which produced guidance. Regulators legalized what already worked. Exporters wrote new terms. Banks pre-wired corridors, swapped lines that paid fast gained friends. The next treasurer copied what saved someone else at 3 a.m. By the time headlines cooled, the curve had already bent. Energy defaulted to local or baskets. Trade finance sold dual sheets. Ratings counted resilience. Corporate treasuries budgeted metal. Retail apps normalized cross-pay. mBridge wasn't a demo. It was the lane people checked like weather. And the habit, that quiet, boring habit, kept phones from ringing on bad Wednesdays. The dollar's future, shrink to strength or slide. Pull back to the desk where the greenback still sets the tone. The dollar isn't vanishing. The choice ahead is smaller and stronger by design, or thinner and noisier by neglect. Higher for longer stopped being a slogan and became a perimeter. Yields rose to keep global demand for treasuries alive through headlines and fiscal noise. That price bought time and pulled in buyers who still trust U.S. courts and custody. It also raised mortgage bills, cooled capex, and made rolling debt harder for smaller firms. The trade-off was explicit. Defend currency demand with yield, except slower domestic gears. Underneath, fiscal gravity tugged louder. Debt service took a fatter slice of every budget meeting. Terming out maturities looked neat until term premia repriced. A longer bond didn't lower cost, it pushed the question forward at a higher coupon. Reserve managers noticed. The old habit, park in long treasuries and forget a decade, turned into laddered bills and mid-tenors with an eye on politics, not rebellion, prudence. Frenchuring turned into a map. The dollar zone stayed broad, but its core condensed into compliant corridors where sanctions risk was low and legal familiarity was high. North America, most of Europe, Japan, Australia, and a chain of aligned hubs. Inside those lanes, the dollar felt like home. Outside, it felt like a strong passport you might not always stamp. That's not collapse, it's ring fencing. Sanctions sharpened. The toolkit moved from broad shocks to targeted cuts at choke points that still run on dollar dependencies, high-end chips, deep liquidity windows, key insurance nodes. Each use came with a cost, benefit memo. Swing the hammer and expect more traffic to lane B, hold it and keep deterrence for when it counts. Leverage now lives on restraint as much as reach. The term premium started telling politics in market language. If governance sounded chaotic, buyers asked for more to hold long paper. That fed back into fiscal math and reserve habits. A middle-power central bank still bought bills for liquidity but thought twice about a 30-year when election cycles promised drama. Not a boycott, a hedge. So the plausible base case looks like this. The dollar slips to a stable minority of global reserves. A big minority, anchored by the deepest markets, cleanest collateral, and courts people accept even when they lose. In that world, the dollar wins by being the best at what only it can do. Price risk at scale, clear complex assets fast, and settle disputes under precedent thicker than any rival's rulebook. The drift scenario is slower and meaner. Each shock pushes a sliver of flow into corridors that don't come back. Liquidity thins at the edges. Bid-ask spreads widen in quiet ways that never hit cable news but raise capital costs for real firms in real towns. The dollar doesn't crash, it corrodes. Influence follows. Which path shows up depends on choices, not fate. Shrink to strength is boring and powerful. Clean up fiscal optics with credible medium-term anchors, not slogans. Price sanctions like surgeons, not like poets. Invest in pipes. Wholesale instant rails that link allies, real-time FX that rivals mBridge on speed and finality, 24/7 clearing windows that match a world that never sleeps. Make custody a weapon of trust, segregation, transparency, and dispute clocks that beat anyone else. If you can't be everywhere, be unbreakable where you are. Widen friendly liquidity. Deepen swap lines with supply chain anchors, Mexico, Canada, Korea, Singapore, so their treasurers sleep with dollar access on the worst days. Encourage private pipes that lower friction for SMEs, not just giants. If the dollar is the easy button on Friday night, it stays pressed on Monday morning. Confidence is quieter than campaigns. A reserve manager remembers who answered a late call. A corporate treasurer remembers which custody statement matched the bars on the shelf. A bank remembers which regulator moved fast without moving goalposts. Those memories compound into preference. There's a cultural pivot too. Accept a multipolar payments map and sell the dollar on service, not on force. If the pitch is use us because you want to, not use us or else. Allies keep it as their first instinct, and rivals keep a toe in for safety. That posture also dulls the story that built the parallel rails in the first place. Micro stakes make it real. A Midwest manufacturer with European buyers and Asian suppliers needs working capital that clears on weekends without false positives freezing payroll. If their bank can move dollars instantly with embedded compliance that explains rather than blocks, the CFO isn't opening a corridor guide at 2 a.m. A reserve manager in Africa wants a repo window that stays open through a headline and haircuts that don't double overnight. Give them that, and the board keeps the dollar line steady while the press wants statements. The drift warning is simple. Weaponize everything and users will migrate. Ignore maintenance and the world's best pipes will clog. Assume privilege and you'll forget price. The dollar's edge wasn't just the flag. It was plumbing that worked, markets that scaled, and laws that held when tempers didn't. So shrink on purpose. Tighten to competence. Be the place where the biggest problems still get solved fastest. In a world of corridors, be the hub that stays lit when storms roll in. If that's the story treasurers tell each other after a bad Wednesday, the greenback doesn't need every lane. It needs the lanes that set the tone. Micro stakes, households, founders, traders. Bring it home. If you're a family trying to keep savings intact, corridors sound like ships you'll never see. What you'll see is a grocery bill that moves with lanes. Staples sourced on rails that clear, clean, stay steady. Goods stuck in old pipes jump when a headline hits. The simple move is boring. Keep a 3 to 6 month cushion, split deposits across 2 banks, and favor accounts that release funds instantly, even on weekends. When your bank settles fast, payday isn't trapped behind a pending on the day rent is due. Rates hit next. Higher for longer protects dollar demand but lifts mortgages and car loans. If you're refinancing, ask one question. Does your bank support weekend settlement and instant inbound transfers? If yes, you're less likely to miss a payment because a transfer got flagged on a Friday night. If not, you'll feel every false positive. Jobs follow invoices. Factories that can switch rails keep lines running when others pause. If you're choosing an employer, ask how they get paid overseas. The ones with dual rail playbooks don't miss payroll on headline days. It isn't loyalty, it's mechanics. SME exporters live or die by two templates. $1, one corridor. Two banking partners, a legacy correspondent for classic lanes, a regional bank tied into CIPS or a friendly clearing hub. Add a small metal buffer, one or two payrolls worth, custodied locally or through a program your bank can pledge. It's not a macro bet. It's grease when FX squeals. Write a sanctions disruption clause that names alternative rails, corridor benchmarks, and an arbitration seat both sides accept. The day you need it, you won't have time to draft. Founders should design runway around frictions, not decks. If customers live in two blocks, build a cap table that doesn't spook either. Split cash by region. Keep vendors on two rails and pre-approve corridor settlement in your procurement policy. When a compliance hold lands at 5 p.m. Friday, you want a toggle, not a prayer. A founder in Ho Chi Minh City kept lights on by flipping a supplier payment to a corridor bank during a review. No speech, just payroll. Vendor risk is your risk. Ask your supplier where collateral lives. If they secure working capital with locally warehoused kilobars and clean audit logs, your shipment is less likely to stall than if their collateral is an unallocated claim in a court an ocean away. Write custody status into your scorecards. The lowest quote isn't the cheapest if it misses delivery by a week. Traders feel the ground tilt first. Basis is back and it has a passport. Watch Shanghai premiums against London when custody is tight. Track corridor health like you track Brent. If a lane flashes yellow and your hedge references a benchmark that settles on another rail, you're trading two risks, not one. mBridge pay versus pay shrinks daylight exposure. That changes carry math. Onshore-offshore yuan depth isn't a headline, it's your spread. A ruble-yuan pair that used to feel like an alley now trades like a street. Layer swap lines and you've drawn a neighborhood. Desk habits update quietly. Add a field to term sheets for corridor benchmarks. Add a checkbox for unit collars at quarter end. Tie working capital costs to operational resilience. Dual rails, hard custody, auditor-ready logs. A client who can clear on corridor lanes deserves cheaper capital because their odds of failure fell after the last drill. Household playbook. Diversify banks and channels. Keep small balances in the currencies you actually spend. If your local FX is brittle, consider a measured allocation to physical, properly custodied, not in a sock drawer. If you freelance across borders, offer two settlement options and price the slower one higher. If your card lets you pick a corridor at checkout, use the one with instant confirmation and lower fees. $5 and 5 minutes become habit. A micro chain says it cleanest. A cocoa buyer in Abidjan used a corridor price with a unit collar to bridge quarter-end FX noise. The ship docked, the hedge matched, the bank liked the logs, and the season survived. A steel mill in South Asia flipped one coking coal invoice to a yuan lane when a dollar bank coughed, then flipped back a week later. The difference wasn't politics. It was Thursday payroll. The patchwork world rewards boring prep, dual rails, clean custody, clauses that travel, and a reflex you drill until it's muscle memory. When one door sticks, don't argue with the hinge. Take the stairs. Meaning the quiet revolution. Step back and listen to what actually shifted. Power slid off stages and into standards. It moved from slogans to screens, from sanctions lists to settlement APIs, from summit photos to invoice fields. That's not loud, it's permanent. What looked like de-dollarization on cable turned into something calmer on desks. Optionality. Corridors where energy paid in local terms, rails where value moved without asking one capital for permission, buffers where gold absorbed the shocks software can't. The unit wasn't a flag, it was a yardstick with a spine. mBridge wasn't a manifesto, it was a clock that kept both legs honest. CRINK built the sanctions-proof Edge. BRICS and their partners turned it into something boring enough for auditors. And the guardians weren't presidents. They were risk officers who refused to push a broken button twice. Treasury leads who wrote annexes that saved a payroll. Engineers who built adapters so a payment could land on a bad Wednesday. That's how orders change, not declared settled. The dollar didn't vanish. It seeded lanes and kept the ones that still set tone, depth, law, scale. In the space it left, middle powers built hallways lined with exit signs. Energy turned into a currency of its own. Gold moved from asset to infrastructure. Benchmarks split gently and then stuck. Each routine that never broke at 3 a.m. rewired preference without a parade. Meaning the future won't be monolithic. It'll be a fabric of lanes, clauses, bands, and buffers that users stitch themselves. Sovereignty won't be a speech. It'll be the quiet ability to choose a rail and to change rails when it matters. When the next call comes at 3 a.m., the question won't be who's loudest. It'll be who answers first, whose promise clears, and who gets to write tomorrow's fine print. That shift is already priced into invoices. Power moved from podiums to pipes, and the next reroute won't ask permission before it lands. If you want the first look at the bridge the energy trade will actually use, subscribe now and watch our breakdown of mBridge's first live settlement with a unit collar. Share this with someone still betting on one rail, and ask which door they'll take when one sticks.